Hello, everybody. We are super excited to be talking about the birth story. If y'all did not check out MG's highlight reel on my Instagram, make sure you guys check that out. She talks about everything that she went through in her pregnancy, how she was preparing for her birth, all of those sorts of things. But we are going to talk all about her actual birth now. And in order for us to do that, we need to make sure that you guys hear it from the source and not just read about it, because those are fun things to do. But I'm excited for MG to also be sharing those things with us. So, MG, without further ado, I know you kind of introduced yourself on my stories a little bit, but tell everybody who doesn't know who you are, tell them who you are. And also, for those of you who are watching, drop in the comments where you're from, how many weeks you are, because you might be right around the corner and this might be the story that you need to hear right before you go into labor. So, MG, tell us who you are, when you gave birth, all the good stuff you want to know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I could talk about my birth all day, every day. I'm still obsessed with it. But my name's Mariagracia Rivas Verrier. I go by MG. I am a music therapist living right outside of DC, and I work at Children's National in DC in the Center for Cancer and Blood Disorders. I've wanted to be a mom since I was a little kid. Like, I am the kid, adolescent, young adult that would walk around with balloons in their shirt, or even my husband will make fun of me, like when I would be super full from eating, I'd be like, isn't this so sweet? Because I just so badly wanted to have a child my whole life. And so last year, we were very fortunate to be able to conceive a baby. And I was like, all right, game on, let me just learn and everything that I can online. And we ended up, our due date was April 9th and our baby came April 8th. We did we did have him at a birth center in Chantilly, Virginia, Premier Birth Center. And I feel like our story is quite unique in the sense that I was never one to go in thinking like, I'm going to have an unmedicated birth. I'm like against an epidural, but I also wasn't a person thinking I'm for sure going to have an epidural, right? So it's just, the more I learned, the more I figured out what I definitely didn't want and what I definitely wanted. So as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I started listening to a very specific podcast called Birth Queens. I really recommend it to everyone. And I started just going down the rabbit hole of Instagram. I'm not... it's sometimes really hard for me to focus on reading. So I'm more of a visual learner. So that's how I found your Instagram. And I was kind of just stalking all the videos. I know a lot of people really watch other, I think Labor Mommy Nurse, another really famous one, but I just really connected with the way you spoke about birth and everything. I also really like, bad as bad as mother birther. It's such a good, okay,
amazing. Yeah.
Okay. So I was just very in love with the process of birth, but really wanted to educate myself. And I had a lot of really not fortunate experiences with my OBGYN that I'm more than happy to get to. But as a first time mom, but also as any type of second, third, you want to feel special and you have an idea of how you want your pregnancies to go. And my first appointment was wonderful. And then my second one, I had someone else. And that's when I realized like, oh, this is a rotating type of thing. Mm-hmm. And they did tell me, oh, we have more people that deliver at our partner hospital. And I remember thinking, I don't like that. But I also understand that maybe, my insurance doesn't cover a home birth and we weren't going to pay a home birth out of pocket. Also, the concept of a home birth was terrifying for my husband, was very foreign to me. I didn't really know about the birth center, but every time I went to my OBGYN, the more displeased I was. I think a couple of things that really did it for me was that during our second ultrasound, which is when you can see the baby more formed, they really rushed us through it, and we got the pictures, and outside of like a foot and the head, I didn't know what I was looking at. And I remember feeling really upset in that appointment. And that was followed by meeting with the doctor, who was very lovely. But then they asked us if we wanted to do all these type of tests and genetic testing and all these things. And we hadn't thought about that because we didn't know we were going to be asked that.
Yeah.
And so we asked for a little bit of privacy, and somebody came in every couple minutes to check in. And it very much felt like a rush process. And then when we finally made a decision out of being rushed, they made us wait even longer because we had lost our line for phlebotomy for the lab test. And then after that, they forgot to send us our results.
Oh, wow.
We were going to get a couple of results for one thing and a couple of results for another, and they forgot. And my husband, Mark, and I thought, well, they said it was going to take like max of 3 weeks, and it's been 4, and we haven't heard anything. Clearly there's something wrong. And then you start to spiral, right? And during the first trimester, even the beginning of the second, I didn't feel, my placenta was in the front, so I didn't really feel the kick for a while, and I started to get worried. And so I had to call the nurse practitioner and leave my my voicemail. I called several times, and they were like, "Oh yeah, everything's normal. We're so sorry, we forgot." And while I had her on the phone, I said, "Okay, am I supposed to make an appointment at this stage?" And she goes, "No, you're fine." And I had jumped in on a live Q&A to the birth center that I ended up giving birth in because I was just really curious and wanted to ask them a bunch of questions, like mortality rate, like how many people rotate between, everyone. What are you guys doing for, back then COVID precautions? What can I move? Can I eat? Like all of the basic questions. And Mark and I had multiple questions. And and I had learned how many times I was supposed to get checked out in the first and second trimester. And that didn't line up with what the OBGYNs told me. And I remember being like, am I not supposed to have an appointment in like a week or 2? And she goes, no, because you're this far along, right? And I said, no, I'm not. And I gave whatever number I had. And she goes, oh yeah, make sure you schedule that. And so to me, all of those things combined, I was clearly a number. Even if I really liked one doctor, 1 out of 13 doctors was not going to cut it when it came to my prenatal and labor experience. So, so even though my whole family was like, geez, MJ can't handle birth, like she can't handle, and I said this in your stories, like I cannot. I got an eyebrow wax once and I cried and I couldn't do it anymore after that. I can't get a Brazilian or like a bikini wax. Shoes, nothing. I'm not like, I don't like discomfort. I don't like pain. None of those things. And when my family heard that I was going to a birth center and this birth center couldn't provide any type of pharmacological pain management, everyone was kind of like, and something that I learned early on, everyone meant well. They wanted the best for us and for the baby, of course. And, what if something happens? What if the baby has to go to the NICU? And those are all questions that we asked ahead of time before transitioning, and we felt very comfortable with all of that. So then after all those questions were answered, it was more of, okay, what are you going to do for pain management? And I, learned a lot with your class, thankfully. For those that have not decided what kind of class you want to take, because I'm very indecisive when it comes to things that have to do with money. But I knew that I didn't really care about having like the best bassinet or because knowledge is power. And I really thought, okay, if I'm going to pour anything into anything when it comes to like prenatal things, vitamins or whatever, it's going to be learning what to expect, because I learned from talking or watching stories and talking to people that when you don't know anything when it comes to your body, then you allow things to kind of happen out of a lack of knowledge. And so that's kind of essentially how I decided to take your class. And I learned so much about the process of birth, but I think the most beautiful part was that I was doing it right alongside with my husband. So every week we watched a couple of videos, a little bit at a time. I took notes. He took notes. And then we jumped on those Zoom calls with everyone, and we came in with like, we have all of these questions
I
because
remember. I was like, y'all's group was so like there's like so many of the families are super, super engaged that like you saw that come into the program. But like your group specifically, because it was very time bound at that point. Y'all's group was so I mean, I felt like because I used to be a teacher and I felt like these families are on it. And like ever since y'all came with a fire like that, I mean, notebooks in hand, like y'all, those of you who are listening, straight pen and paper. Okay, we have these questions. And I was like,
yeah,
that's what I want. Like,
yeah,
and I think sometimes you can feel weird. Like some people I've heard like will say, well, is it okay if I ask another question? I'm like, no, bring it. Because the
yeah,
more questions that you ask, and that's why I love that y'all took it so seriously and you were so invested in the process and the journey, really, because I think the one thing that is myself included, that we don't know until the day of is like we are reading and thinking that we're like comprehending these things, and then we're expecting ourselves to just like roll out the red carpet and like have it all
mm-hmm,
like,
mm-hmm,
memorized for that day of. But what doesn't end up happening is us feeling confident when we walk into those rooms if we have not asked the right questions leading up to that. I
mm-hmm,
always
mm-hmm.
tell people like the amount of time and energy and effort that you invest in your pregnancy, like that's the real work. Like
Mm-hmm.
people think of like the day of birth as the real work. And of course it is a lot of work, right? Let's not discredit that, right? But it's usually harder when you are walking into it very lost.
Mm-hmm,
Whereas like if you really put the work in now in the
mm-hmm.
pregnancy, then like you're just executing on the things that you've practiced, that you've learned, that you've asked questions about, that you feel confident in, that you worked on during the pregnancy. And so like my whole philosophy is your pregnancy and what you do and how you do the work and how you prepare in the pregnancy, that sets the tone for the birth. And
Yeah,
then your birth sets the tone for postpartum.
yeah,
Like, you know, how you walk into postpartum, not necessarily how difficult or easy postpartum is, because
yeah,
postpartum is a lot for all of
yeah,
us, regardless like how positive your birth experience or negative it was. But at least in my experience, I have found that the more questions that at least Harold and I asked throughout the journey, the better equipped we felt in
mm-hmm,
the actual birth. And it sounds like,
mm-hmm.
I mean, between you and Mark, you guys were like asking so many questions. And I think there was like, we have like, you know, the recordings and things that people can go back and watch. And there was one that I was looking at. I think maybe it was a screenshot, and it was you and Mark had volunteered to like practice the hip squeeze, and we're just like giving you feedback. It was amazing. So I still have that to say, y'all did the work, and I'm just so
And I have to say that call specifically, I am so glad that we volunteered, and I'm so glad that we talked about the hip squeezes, because in theory, I remember when I heard hip squeezes, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, there's no way. Like that sounds so dumb. Like how is a squeeze going to relieve pain in, my
Mhm.
vaginal area? And we practiced, and you actually coached him beautifully, like, okay, put your hands lower. So when we were doing the ice cube technique, which you also recommended, he would practice the hip squeezes, and he would practice
Mhm.
telling me the language, the affirmations that I wanted to hear, because
Yeah.
I'm a big words of affirmation gal. And that was the primary form of pain management in addition to music
Yeah.
during the actual labor experience. But
Yeah.
for those of you that are pregnant right now, I took the class right at the beginning of my third trimester, and right before that, during the second trimester, I watched almost every reel and YouTube video that Chanel had. And I still learned a lot in classes, because I think another misconception too is that you'll find a lot of free information online, and you absolutely can find free information, but having more in-depth information, and also having those calls where I could actually speak to you and get my questions answered, and also have this community, was so empowering to me. I remember Shelly in the call would also come in with her notebook and questions, and I'd be like,
Yes.
yes, I had that question too, like perfect. And then she and I would connect after class and like talk about it too.
Mhm.
But for anyone that's pregnant, some things that I did in addition to take the class was also like the ice cube technique. Music
Mhm.
was such an integral peace. I actually
Mm.
was speaking to a patient, a chronic pain patient that I see, and they asked me, "Are you going to utilize music in your sessions?" Because here I am facilitating music therapy interventions or experiences for pain management. And I said, absolutely, I have to practice what I preach, right?
Yeah.
And just so people are aware, singing, if not singing, then humming or chanting, toning, and slash or listening to music has a direct correlation with
Mhm.
decreased pain perception and pain intensity, because when you are music in general, it releases endorphins in your brain. It also releases I think it's called enkephalin, which is very similar to to endorphins. And it also when you practice listening to music and relaxing, then it's very much like, in a way, muscle memory. So I
Mhm.
listened to Dos Oruguitas from Encanto every single time I did the ice cube technique.
Mm.
And when I share the specifics of my birth, this song is going to come up a couple more
Mm.
times, and it's so important. But yes, practicing that ice cube technique. I also had an inflammation of your pelvis has 3 rings, and I had an outer, like, and that was inflamed. And so I went to see a pelvic floor therapist. She was really helpful, but it was just the way my body was. There was no way to really fix it until
Mm.
postpartum. There were ways to relieve the pain slightly with some exercises. I also worked out throughout my whole pregnancy. I do think that that really helped because
Yeah.
it strengthened a whole bunch of muscles. Like I said, I created birth hype and birth chill playlists, which really, I played music almost the whole time during my labor. And I think that was, oh, and of course, I set boundaries. And that was really important
Mm.
too, because anytime somebody told me, like, are you sure? It wouldn't discourage me because I had been so empowered through the class, but it
Yeah.
annoyed me. And I didn't want to be annoyed when I thought of my labor. Because if you're already thinking, like, ooh, there's a small chance that I might want to get an epidural,
Yeah.
if those people that are closest to you start putting that doubt, then you're more likely to believe, like, oh wait, but can I actually do this? Like, I
Yep.
cried during Charlie horses. Am I actually going to be able to, like, have this child without any type of pain management? So I actually had to set boundaries with my family members and saying, you know what, I actually don't want to talk about having an unmedicated labor anymore, because it's not exciting anymore talking
Yeah.
about it. And that was a lie. I was very excited to talk about it, just not with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. And one of the reasons that also made me decide to have or try to go for an unmedicated labor was the fact that I have a joint condition called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Mine's very mild. I'm very stretchy and I can overextend and eventually hurt myself. And so I had read these stories about how with an epidural, if you're pushing, you can't really feel down there, then you're more likely to, in extreme cases, you can, like, break things. In my case, I would have just, like, dislocated certain things, and
Mm.
not being able, my fear of not feeling my body was really strong in comparison to the possibility of having pain. Um,
Mm.
the the fear of pain, which I didn't really have, wasn't really strong in comparison to the fact that I might not feel anything in
Got
any
it.
places.
So it sounds like you had this desire, this very strong urge to want to be in control of your body. And like the
Exactly.
fear of not being in control of your body was greater than whatever physical pain or physical experience that
Yeah.
birth would have brought you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's big, y'all. And I think one of the things that's important, like when you think about your fears, you think about your frustrations, like write them all down. Like one tip that I want you guys to leave with today, or just one thing that I want you to do, is write all of your fears down. Like no fear is too small and no fear is too large. But I also want you to consider, like, when you're thinking about your fears, does one outweigh the other, right? Is like my fear of, or your desires, like which one is stronger for you? Is the desire stronger than the fear, or is the fear stronger than the desire? And how do you get to a place where your desires are so strong that your fears don't even have enough power to push these desires down or out of the way, or even like displace them, or take the strength away from the desire, because that's really what pushes you through. That's your why. Your why is really what pushes you through, and why you want this experience. It doesn't have to be unmedicated. It can be you can just say, I want to have a positive birth, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
you choose to have medication or not is totally up to you. But the desire of why you want to have a positive birth is going to be what pushes you through the entire experience when those fears start to creep up. And can you, like, I mean, I know we're going to start to talk through the birth story, but can you maybe tell us, like, when you, now that it's all said and done, when those fears that you might have had during your pregnancy started to creep up, or, if they started to creep up in the labor experience, how did you keep your mind in the right place?
Yeah. I didn't have any, I think my biggest fear that I had during pregnancy, my biggest fear was having a miscarriage in the first trimester, and that like overtook my brain, and I had to really look at evidence of
Mhm.
and percentage and all of that. But I didn't really have any fears for the labor itself because I was so educated. And
Mm,
even Mark and I talked about this all the time. Like, if you want to transition for a compassionate epidural, or if something happens and we have to transition, are you happy that we went with the birth center? And I said 1,000%, because I got the best prenatal care where they made me feel special. We took the best class where we are so knowledgeable. So one of my favorite things was that you made us have a birth preference, and that incorporated choices for unmedicated and medicated and C-section preferences too. So I felt like no matter what was coming in me, I felt prepared in every sense
yeah.
of the word. But excuse me. Um, Fear creeped up because my labor was 33 hours, and it wasn't like I expected, like, oh, I'm gonna like relax during early. It was very intense the whole time. And I
Yeah.
don't know if that's because of my HEDS or my inflamed pelvis or whatever, but I think that towards the end I was so fatigued that my
Mhm.
fear, but it wasn't a fear, was that I had been laboring for so long
Yeah.
um, in the birth center that we were gonna like transition and my fear was that we were gonna have a baby in the car. That was my big fear.
Mhm.
And we would have been fine, I think, truly, because
Yeah.
we also had a fantastic doula that would have been great. And Mark was so educated at that point too, that we wouldn't have wanted a baby in the car, but I think we would have handled it somehow. So I think the biggest fear was just the fatigue. And
Yeah.
in the story, you'll hear that I didn't know if my water broke, and we thought I was in prodromal labor, which is when you're not in actual labor. So my fear was that this baby was never going to come, and then when it came, that I was going to have to transition. So
Mhm.
no big fears while I was actually pregnant. Thankfully, I think people looked at me like I had 3 heads because I was so excited to give birth.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the story.
Okay.
Let's get into, I know that's why people are here. So let's talk about the actual story.
Yeah,
Tell us from the beginning. Y'all
sure.
obviously know, and you've seen me post about it a few times at this point. It was long. And there's another mom who's in the program, and her name is Emily. And she had a long birth as well. And I think one of the themes that both of you have brought up so far is that long labors don't have to be scary.
Yeah.
People will say to me all the time, I just don't want to have a long labor.
Hmm.
And the fear is that a long labor is harder and a shorter labor is easier. And that's not necessarily always the case, one way or the other. So tell us, like, from the beginning, you thought your water broke, just like give us all the details. And
Yeah.
as you guys are listening, ask questions, like put questions in the chat if you have them as they come up, and we'll answer them along the way. So that way you guys have the clarity that you need, and you can really make sure that you're understanding the story in its entirety. So take it away.
Hmm. Sure. Okay. So labor technically starts when your contractions start, right? So I had this idea in my head that my early labor was going to be eating pad thai, snuggling with my husband, and watching Friends. And it wasn't like that, because the morning of, I want to say it was a Thursday, so the 7th of April, I took off of work for my prenatal appointment. And I started losing my mucus plug that morning. But as many of you know, or maybe don't know, that can mean that labor is coming soon or not very soon. So it means nothing. So I had just a little bit that came off, and I was like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense, because baby's due date, which means nothing, is going to be on Saturdays. It can be next week or later today. Who knows? So every time I peed and cleaned myself, I could see a little bit more of the mucus plug. And I went to my appointment. They said the same thing. Go home, like whatever. So that day I had lunch, which was a salad and like 2 Oreos, and didn't think twice about it. And I had, because I had taken off, I booked a foot massage, thinking, oh, I'm going to ask them to do that acupressure, and if it starts labor, great. If not, great, because I do think that that is the safest way to naturally, I mean, there's other ways too, but I wasn't ready to pull all the stops to have my baby, right? But I just wanted a relaxing experience. So the appointment was set for 3, and at 2:30 or 2:40, I started having contractions that I didn't know were contractions, but in hindsight, they were. I thought that it was going to be like period cramps at first, and I actually felt them like in my butthole at first, and I was like, "What is this?" But I'm going to rest just in case. And then at 2:50, close to 3 o'clock, it was pretty uncomfortable, and I thought, am I going to have to cancel this foot massage? But I'm very stubborn, so I just moved it to 3:15. So when I was in the car, I started driving, and I had a small contraction that kind of felt like a period cramp, and I thought, I think I'm having a contraction, but I'm not sure. It wasn't until I was laying on the bed sideways before they even touched me that I had like an actual contraction that was a few seconds long. And I was like, ooh, okay, this is it, but this is doable. Thinking, I'm going to have a pain-free birth. I can handle all this pain, whatever. I had this idea. And then I proceeded to have 3 contractions on that little table. And then at the very end, they did the pressure points, which at that point was a moot point because I was already having contractions. So I contacted my doula, told her that I think I was in labor. She said, it sounds very early. Let me know what you want me to do. And I said, okay. I got home, super excited, ordered pad thai from, not pad thai, Thai food, pad thai and pad see ew and spring rolls and the whole shebang. And I was super pumped. Mark works from home, so he was taking calls all day. And the food came at 4-ish, and I took a bite of a spring roll and immediately vomited. And I thought, this is terrible. So I thought, I'm going to rest, and then I'm going to eat my food, and I'm going to put on my movies and my TV shows, and I'm going to snuggle with my husband. And I couldn't, if I try to take a bite, I would gag. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't eat. I laid in bed for a little bit, took a couple breaths, and at 5:30, I went to the dilation station, which was a toilet, which I learned from you with our yoga blocks, and I had the whole thing. I had already had my birthing affirmations already throughout the whole apartment a couple days before, had candles, and I was just relaxing. And things sped up really quickly. Now, I had also read that people with HEDS have really quick labors because of the way the joints are. So I thought, I'm having this baby real quick. Joke's on me. And at around 6, I was like moaning really loudly. And I remember calling out to Mark, and I was like, Mark, it's getting more intense. Like, ah, and he was in the middle of a call, and he had to be like, I think we're having our baby. Sorry, let me go. So what I remember next is Mark sat behind me, did the hip squeezes, which it was then that I realized, like, oh shoot, these actually really help. And I had the music, and we were fine. In one of those moments, I vomited on the trash can, and during that moment, what I thought was my water breaking, like a gush of liquid went to the toilet, and I thought, like, ooh, my water broke, great, but I can still handle it. Now, Mark had downloaded a contraction tracker, and at around 9, we were at a contractions where every minute for like a total of an hour, and it was very intense. And I was in this like other space thinking, oh my goodness, it's going to be a short labor. So we called the birth center, and our midwife, Nancy, said, I don't think so, Mark. It's been very short for a first-time mom. And I was also their first patient with HEDS, so they didn't want to risk anything either. But they said, let me hear her. And I was like, like making all these moaning. And they were coming very intensely, very quickly too. So she said, okay, I guess come on over. So in the car, that definitely stalled my labor. And that is not abnormal from everything you taught us. And so Mark said that I went to the back and I was kind of like laying in force, and it kind of in child's pose. And Mark said that I just like stopped making noises. And he didn't know if it was a good or bad thing, but he wasn't going to say anything. So we get to the birth center. It's nobody's there because they're only open 3 days a week. And so we got there Thursday night at like 10:45. So it was the midwife, nurse, our doula, Mark, and myself. Everyone was game on, turned on the tub because I wanted to labor in the tub, not so much have the baby in the tub. Put my birth affirmations everywhere, like all of these things. Put my music speaker, everything. My doula started doing hip squeezes. And my midwife looked at me and she goes, your contractions are really far apart. And Mark said, no, they were like 1 minute apart. And she goes, they're having every 10 minutes. I don't think you're having this baby anytime soon. Did your water break? And I said, yes, my water broke on the toilet. And then she goes, you look really tired. What have you eaten? When was the last time she ate? And Mark said she had 2 Oreos and a salad for lunch and she hasn't been able to eat anything. So then she said, you need to eat something. And I physically couldn't. They brought all my Thai food. And so they gave me fluids, which also stalled labor, but I was able to nap. Mark and I napped for an hour and that was great. But then, and in my birth plan was that I didn't want cervical checks until it was really necessary. And I really didn't want them because one, it was going to stall labor, and two, because I knew it was going to be painful, given the inflammation that I had been having during pregnancy. So at around 3 in the morning, my midwife said, I really think we need to check. I just need to know where you're at. And I was like, no. But then eventually I was like, fine. And it was painful. And thankfully everyone followed my advice that I didn't want to know the dilation. And I strongly recommend everyone to say that you don't want to find out dilation, because you know what, if you've been uncomfortable for a couple hours or even 1 hour and you are at dilated 1, that's going to break you. So the midwife and my doula and Mark went to the hallway and came back, and my contractions were super far apart, but very intense each time. And I didn't know this, but now I know I was dilated 1 centimeter, and I was in so much pain at the house. So I did a whole bunch of exercises. I did active rest, all these things. And then I feel like at 7 in the morning, Mark went to get breakfast for everyone. And then my midwife goes, MG, I need to know if your water broke. And there's this way where if you like swab a Q-tip, you can test it. And I was like, no, it broke. Like, you weren't there. I heard it. And she was like, I don't think so. Because when I felt it and she explained it, I said, no, it definitely broke. I don't want to do it. And so she gave me another hour. Contractions were still far apart, but still, uncomfortable. And she said, I really need to know if you're in prodromal labor or not. Because if not, we could stay here forever and you need to go home. And Mark and I were like, we're not going home. We thought we were having a baby last night. How is this going to be any different? And she gave me all these other options. So I said, okay, let's get a cervical exam. That showed, lo and behold, my water did not break. So then they gave us more time. And then at this point, she said, you have 3 options. 1, you go home and you can come back every single day and we can check you every day. And I said, I'm not doing that. And Mark said, we can rent out a hotel so that we're nearby. And I said, I'm not leaving. And then she said, we can sweep your membrane if you really want to have this baby now. And you can drink castor oil, but that's not really going to promise anything other than you might make your baby mad, because you're going to contract your uterus, but that's not going to. So I was left like really annoyed because I thought I've been doing all this work. And the second time I got the cervical exam, I was dilated 3. So like nothing had happened, even though I had been doing lunges and like the balls and everything. And so so this is where Chanel comes into my story. So I contacted Chanel and I said, should I do a membrane sweep, or like they have these homeopathic drops with the castor oil? And Chanel was so good. And she said, why are you chasing? It felt like, like godly the way you're speaking to me, like, why are you chasing labor? Why are you, you know, and I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm so uncomfortable. I want to, you know, it wasn't like, get this baby out of me. I want to meet my baby, but just like, I'm so tired. I've been so uncomfortable. I've been in pain on and off. And I don't know when I'm having this baby. So what Chanel ended up recommending was, you know, obviously just like my doula, they said, it's your choice, your body, your choice. But then Chanel said, I wouldn't do the membrane sleep. Like, if you want to try the other thing, okay. And so I thought, okay, I think that's what I'll do. And because even in my birth plan, I said, you know, that I wanted to do nothing unless it was medically necessary. And so I think that that was a good reality check, that it was not medically necessary. And it was really just fatigue and discomfort. And I knew that. So I said, okay, I'm going to do the castor oil, and I'm going to do these little homeopathic drops, which I don't know if they, you know, I was like, I don't know if they do anything. So they gave me the castor oil in ice cream. And when I tell you that thing was the most delicious thing I ate in hours, like it was so good. I could not, like, I was guzzling it down. So for anyone that ever is encouraged or recommended to drink castor oil, everyone says it's disgusting because you try it in a smoothie. And that is because of the texture. If you have castor oil, and it has to be the right amount, right? That's why the midwives do it. If you have it in ice cream, the texture is just right. And then the flavor of the ice cream will actually overpower the castor oil. So I was like, this is delicious. This has been like my dinner and my breakfast. And then we did nipple stimulation with a breast pump. And then at that point, I was excited, even though the contractions were intense. And I have pictures. My doula was there, and I was bouncing on the ball, and she was rubbing my back, and I was like dancing to my Humps by the Black Eyed Peas and singing. And then the contraction would come, and I was like, ooh, okay. But I had a plan, and that made me excited because, again, knowledge and a plan is power always. And so then after that, the nurse put some oil on my tummy, and then she gave me a massage in the dilation station, and that just kept going. And then Mark got lunch for everyone, and I was just so tired. And then, according to Mark, at around 7 p.m., he said that there was like this big shift in me, and that I was no longer talking in between contractions. And I was doing lunges in the hallway and resting. And with every contraction, it got more intense as the night went on. And nobody could touch me except for Mark, because he was the only one strong enough to do those hip squeezes. So a contraction would come, especially at night. That was when it was the most intense, at nighttime on the 8th. So a contraction would come, and I would say, Mark! And Mark would run he's very tall, he's 6'3". So he would go on his knees and push and squeeze my hips. And my doula would give me verbal affirmation, and she was holding my speaker the whole time and like rubbing my back and really encouraging me. She was also holding me while we were doing, her name's Creamery, for anyone that wants to see her Instagram is See You Birth. And then I went to the bathroom. With every contraction, I had that anal pressure that I had been feeling from 2:45 until then. So it was a lot. And so then my people were taking like a 1-hour nap here, except for Mark and myself, of course. And at 7, no, yeah, like later on 7 something, the midwife came and she goes, it's time for a cervical exam. And Mark was like, no, Nancy, no, you have no idea how well she's been doing. Like, there's been such a change. Because I think Nancy had taken like a 30-minute nap, and Mark was like, you haven't even seen her for the last 30 minutes. He was so protective. It was so sweet. And then Nancy goes, Mark, she has not slept for like 30 hours. If she has not progressed, and because she hasn't eaten, I'm afraid that she's going to have to go to a hospital, because I don't know if we're going to be able to help her. She's been here for like almost 3 days. And so, they were just like talking back and forth, and I was like, okay, I'll do it. I don't care. So I like waddled to the bed, and at this point I put Dos Oruguitas on, because I had been practicing with my with my eyes. And that's when I tell you that when you practice with music, your breathing techniques with relaxing your muscles, I don't know why I didn't do that with those cervical exams, but during the 3rd cervical exam, my midwife said, you were so relaxed. that was the best cervical exam out of the three. And there was no pain when I was doing that. And
Mhm.
I really think that it was that muscle memory from the music and everything, because I didn't have those oruguitas for the other two cervical exams. So that was, in hindsight, I wish I had practiced breathing techniques with more songs, with my whole playlist instead of
Mm.
just one. So
Took
those
it.
oruguitas played. Yes, I mean, I'll talk about music and music therapy anytime, any day. But at that point, all I know is that Mark left to go to the hallway. He came back and like this. And so I was 7 centimeters dilated. And so at that point,
Yay.
everyone was like, we're having this baby at some point. Um, and so then they did this activity, or this move called Three Sisters, which
Mhm.
is like the peanut ball on one side, peanut ball on another side, and then peanut ball over. And I remember when they told me that, I was like, there's no way, because I can't lay down because my butt hurts so much and my stomach
Mhm.
hurts.
Yeah.
But I also knew in my head, I told myself, like, this is going to be the last chance that I
Yeah.
have before they like ship me to the hospital. And also, hospital births, at least with our insurance, are a lot more expensive if you get an epidural. So for the
Yeah.
birth center, we paid. Am I allowed to say prices? Just I
Mhm.
think
Yeah, I
transparency
think
is
it's
so
helpful
good.
for people to know. Yeah.
Yeah. So the birth center, even with the holistic stim kit, it was castor oil and some drops for like 4 hours. It was, I want to say 1,700. And my friend who has the exact same insurance that had a hospital birth with an epidural, and she had a really good experience too, it was $3,000.
Mm.
Not just because of the epidural, but because of all the services. So if you give
Right.
birth at a hospital, which is also great, just make sure you ask for an itemized list, because there's a lot of things that you can actually discount and like argue. But anyway, so I thought, I have not birthed for this long, and then we're gonna have to pay $3,000 if I go. So that was also like a little, fire to me. So I
Yeah.
thought, okay, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna do this Three Sisters exercise. And that is when I actually felt, when I think of pain, that's when I felt pain. Like during those
Mhm.
few hours. I remember during the third one where I was over, the contraction and like the anal pressure, the butt pressure was the most painful part. And it wrapped around the bottom of my tummy. And that's when I couldn't keep my cool with my music and like the humming and chanting. That's when I was like,
Yeah.
ah! And I was like hitting the headboard. Um, so then I remember when we finished that, my doula said, you know what, I think we should move away from hip squeezes. And I remember thinking, like, there's no way, this is the only thing that's kept
Same
me
here.
alive this whole time. But they wanted me to practice not relying on that, especially during, the pushing. So I went with the comb method. That was really, really helpful too. So then the only thing that helped me during the contractions, since I couldn't do hip squeeze at that point, was the comb movement side to side and my music. And that was literally it. And then I remember I felt like I had to pee at one point, and I couldn't pee. And my water broke at 11:15 or 11:20, and it was like the movies. It was like a contraction came and I screamed to hit the wall, and then it was like psh, everywhere, like literally like a balloon.
Wow.
And then, Nancy, my midwife, says, great, okay, where do you want to have this baby? And I was like, can I
Mhm.
go to the tub? And she goes, no, this baby's coming now, we don't have time to fill up the tub right now, because it was already empty. And so I thought, okay, I originally wanted to do it in my force. And then I remember like knees in, knees in, knees in. That was like my big thing. So I waddled over to the bed. Then I grabbed my playlist, my chill playlist that I've been listening to forever. And I had 72 songs. So it's like a couple hours. And I shuffled it. And this song by Simone called La Espera, which is a Spanish song about motherhood. And it's beautiful. That came on, and I was able to breathe through it and like grunt a little bit. And then Go the Distance from Hercules comes on, and he started crowning with Go the Distance, which was so
Oh.
epic. And then everyone knew that I did not want to push. And Nancy, my midwife, also knew that a yellow flag is a red flag to me, because I tend to get a little bit antsy, especially in a hospital setting, having seen so much. And so after a minute, she goes, okay, Mariagracia, it's time to push. And I was like, no, it's not. Hold on. My baby's going to deliver himself. And she goes, okay, just a little bit more time to push. And sure enough, Dos Oruguitas started playing. Out of the 72 songs, Dos Oruguitas started playing, and my body relaxed. And then Marco Daniel, who is our baby, just, I just felt like this pressure and then release. Or
Mm.
relief, and release too. And Mark caught our baby as we had planned, passed him from under me, and then I held him and I started crying. I almost dropped him because he was so slippery, and I just looked at him like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe we did this. Snuggled him to Dos Oruguitas. Then Mark came back. The whole time I was praised, cared for emotionally, physically, spiritually. It was just so beautiful. And then we had our golden hour. And then to also, for those that don't remember, you have to deliver your freaking placenta. And
Yeah.
I remember I was like, oh, this is beautiful. And they were like, okay, you should deliver your placenta. And I was like, what? Like, got me out of it. So that part, actually, delivering my placenta was harder than delivering my baby, because it wasn't, I went to the birthing stool and it wasn't coming out. And so, because you have a timeline of when you
Yeah.
want to give birth to your placenta, I saw the timer and I was like, oh, I'm running out of time. And so they offered me Pitocin for that, because they don't give you Pitocin at the birth center for the baby, just for the placenta. And then the placenta came like that. And I mean, then we snuggled to music and sang, and then my doula fed me spoon to mouth. Like, everyone was amazing. We were all joking about like the bets of the time and the weight, and it was literally, I remember thought like, this was the most empowering experience that did not go as planned at all. But I want to do it all over again, and now I know what to expect, because you don't. But I know if I'm going to start losing my mucus plug, I'm going to eat full on meals, like no more salads and 2 Oreos. I know
Yeah.
that for next time, I want Creamery or Doula to come to our home. I think
Mhm.
that we were a little bit like, oh, do we want someone in our home? But I mean, after that, I was naked the whole time in front of my whole team.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and there was so much. I mean, Mark, even before we went into the labor experience, he went from, after your class, he went from, I don't know if we could have a home birth, and birth center is a stretch, to like, we could totally have a home birth. I don't know if we would want to like clean it up in this apartment that we have, but we were just so empowered, and I felt like I was in control the whole time. So
Mm. I love
that's my birth
that.
story.
And first of all, I just want to say like thank you for sharing that and like going into all the details, because I think if somebody were to imagine like the mental stamina that you had to have to go through like
Mm-hmm.
time after them trying to send you home, to like deciding on something that was going to help push this thing to the end, like that could be very overwhelming for somebody. And then not to mention like you didn't really eat, you weren't
Oh gosh.
sleeping, you were exhausted, like,
Yeah.
and your team is also probably exhausted at this point too,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
like as a doula, we're sitting here, we're also supporting you too. And while we aren't contracting, but we're still like with you in the whole journey, right? We don't know
Yeah.
how much sleep your midwife or your doula had before that. And Mark clearly didn't have any rest because he had just come from a call. So
Yeah.
all of these things. So there was a question in the comments, which was the same question as I had, is like, how did you have that mental stamina to like keep going? Obviously there was a motivation of like, I don't want this $3,000 bill. So that was like one thing, which was honestly one of our motivating factors too. When we had our first birth center birth, my husband is the numbers guy, and he's like, "Look, girl." Now he didn't say this, but in my mind, I felt like he would have said like, "All right, now we just dropped a lot of money on this birth center. Now we saw what the hospital bill was the first time we went. Like that's a lot of money, you know." But
Yeah.
of course, it's not about the money. But sometimes it can be a motivator. So tell
Yeah.
us like, what helped you stay mentally and physically um, in the zone? Like, how did you not just say, you know what, like I'm done. Like we've been here for 30 hours. Like just
Yeah.
take me to the hospital and just tap out.
Yeah, I think because the morning of the 8th, the contractions, even though they were really intense, were so far apart, I could still make conversation. So that wasn't even an idea. And then
Mhm.
when they said, do you want to go home? Do you want to go to the hospital? Do you want to? I was like, absolutely not, because this is where I feel most safe. So I think that
Mm.
having the support of my birth team, even though they were trying to give me options, I was still in control. And I knew that at home, I wasn't going to know. I was going to know what to do, but I wasn't going to have a midwife right there in case like the baby came. And I also had that, I think, okay, if we're going back to fears, I can tell, I don't know 100%, but if we had been in a hospital setting, that epidural would have been offered 1,000 times. And
Yeah.
also, I feel like they would have pushed the C-section after that much fatigue. And
Mhm.
when I hear people saying, like, oh, I'm gonna, just this person's gonna be my doula, but they're not really, a doula, then to me, that makes me scared for them because I feel like they're inviting a really terrible experience due to the lack of a support of a birth team. And I know that at some specific times you do need a C-section, and those are important, and it's, medically necessary. But my mom had 3 unnecessary C-sections, and now that I know what I know, she didn't need 3 C-sections. And that was another fear of mine, going to the hospital and having them push something or really encourage, and me being so fatigued to say okay. So I think that what really motivated me was that I had an environment that felt like the closest thing to my home, and I was not going to leave it. One, two, I didn't know where I was dilated, so that also really pushed me. I think if I had known the numbers 113 before that 7, I think I would have been more likely to leave. So I was really excited when I found out that nobody told me those numbers. And I think that in my head, I was so out of it towards the end when I was in so much pain that I was like, surely enough, something's happening, right? So I think the unknown, I reframed it in my head as it's going to happen no matter what. I don't
Mhm.
think I invited other thoughts either.
That's good.
I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think so from the time that labor began until the time that you were 7 centimeters, how
Yeah,
much time was that?
that was from like 2:30 or 2:45 on a Thursday to 7ish on a Friday, 7 at night.
PM?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want you guys to take note of that. And the reason that I say that is because it takes us the longest amount of time to get from 0 to 6 centimeters, right? We don't know when you turn 6 centimeters, right? But active labor, which is 6 to 10 centimeters, goes a lot faster usually than early labor. And early labor is what takes the most amount of time, which is why we always try to keep people at home in early labor. Because if you are in a hospital setting, or even if you do go to a birth center, right? Like this is the time that you're just letting your body do its thing, right? And sometimes you may need
Mm-hmm.
to be there sooner or whatever, but I also want everybody to keep in mind when they think about 33 hours, right? Active labor, because that was at until 7-ish p.m. and you had your baby at what time?
11:46.
Okay, so you were in active labor for less than 5 hours, like 4 hours. You were in active labor for about
Mm-hmm.
4 hours. That's really when the bulk of things happen, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
why you were feeling like so much more intensity. Contractions
Mm-hmm.
were, I mean, it seemed like they were pretty intense for you
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a majority of your labor, but like you had time to rest in between. And usually in early labor, like you do get more rest time.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you guys to keep in mind, like, it's not a good idea and you have to do what's best for you.
Mm-hmm.
But keep in mind that what MG did is the same thing that I did in my second birth, which was we got one vaginal exam throughout the entire labor experience. And that was when I was at that point where I'm just like, I'm so tired. I don't know how much longer I can do this. And they checked me, and that was at about 11 p.m. And I also did the same thing. I tell them, you can tell my doula, but do not tell me, because I knew from
Mm-hmm.
the first time around, like my mind, like it would just be a lot easier for me to just
Mm-hmm.
throw the towel in. And at 11 p.m., and I had been laboring since 11, well, I was having like some Braxton Hicks the day before, but my doula got to our house around 11 a.m. And I had been having some like mild contractions earlier that morning, but um, I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a baby. So I've been doing this thing for 12 hours, which obviously is much shorter than your experience, but things were intense. I thought I was pushing at one point, but I wasn't. And when they went back and told me how far along I was only 4 centimeters. And I was like about to tap out, I mean, at that point. So I want to just like bring y'all's attention to these experiences of like some of us who are people who want to know, we like to be in control. We're type A,
Mm-hmm.
we know
Mm-hmm.
everything. That is me. This is probably the moment. in time and experience that you don't need to know that. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's one piece of information you don't need to know. It's usually how far along you are. Let your birth team, or if you don't have a doula in the space with you, have your partner get that information, because if your partner is educated enough, and Mark clearly knew like what was going on here,
Mm-hmm.
then they can take that information and coach you appropriately if they know what they're supposed to be doing. So I just wanted to like call that point out, which is like you went from 7 centimeters to having a baby in 4 hours. I went from 4 centimeters to having a baby in 4 hours, actually. And it can happen really fast. That active
Yeah.
labor can happen really fast. But usually people throw in that towel so much earlier that now your active labor is going to could take a little bit longer, because now your body, which has been used to potentially moving around and changing positions, is now like just stagnant, right? It's just
Mm-hmm.
sitting in the same position. You might move from side to side, but if there is a chance for you guys to push through, just get to active labor and things
Mm-hmm.
will start picking up.
And one thing to note also is that several studies show that the noise in hospital settings actually will increase your pain and also unfortunately lead to like medical mistakes and everything. So if you enjoy music, having a playlist in your background to kind of zone out the fact that you are in a hospital setting is actually going to contribute to a better birth experience in general and labor experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I love that you guys had the confidence of the evidence, right? Like you had evidence behind all of your decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we know your story, and I know some
Yeah.
people have asked a few questions, how does the hip squeeze help? We can maybe go there first, and then I want to kind of just close it up with what your recommendations are for any mama who's listening to this who is trying to
Yeah.
prepare for a positive birth. But we'll start with um, the two questions that we have in the comments right now are, how does the hip squeeze help, and what is the comb method?
So the hip squeezes for me, and we were coached with Chanel in one of the Zoom calls, just provided immediate relief. So my contractions, like I said, I felt them like butt pressure, and I felt them wrapped around my whole stomach, a little bit on my back, but not too much. Or if there was, I can't remember. And when he squeezed my hips, and I could tell him like a little bit lower, a little bit higher, like I knew exactly where it provided that relief. It was just like it went away a lot. And it wasn't until the very, very end when they recommended that I don't do hip squeezes where I was like, I'm going to lose my mind. The comb method is just having like a normal comb. You don't have to buy anything fancy. I grabbed Mark's comb and just squeezed it in my hand. And that is essentially redirecting your pain to your hand, but it also has to do with some pressure points that are on your hand as well. So you could have two, you could have one. But I would also recommend when you're getting to those points, just swaying side to side. That movement was really, really helpful, and it felt the most natural. And for me, it helped to like hit a wall too.
Yeah.
So,
And what that tells me is that your baby was in the mid pelvis and you started to feel a lot more pressure. You were saying I felt a lot in my butt. Your baby was like in the mid pelvis. If your body was moving side to side, like
mm-hmm.
he was getting lower and closer to birth. Okay. So with all of that, of all that experience, with everything that you learned, with the support that you had, what advice would you give to an expecting mama who is trying to prepare for just a positive birth? Doesn't have to be
Yeah.
unmedicated, doesn't have to be out of hospital, but in general, like these women want to have a very empowering experience, the same
Yeah.
as you. What advice would you give them?
The biggest one is invest in a class. Don't wing it. Like don't wing anything that has to do with your body. So of course I'm like Chanel's number one fan. So I'm gonna say like go for Chanel's class, because also having access to the community and being able to be in touch with you was clearly a positive thing even during my labor. So big advocate for that, a class. To have a birth team that makes you feel empowered. So, you can have the number one doctor or nurse out there, but if you don't feel loved and supported by that person, it's going to make it a little bit difficult. So interview your doula. Remember that you get to pick who your birth team is. A lot of times, I mean, the midwives rotated, I think, I had a chance of 4 of them. So that already made it feel a little bit safer than a big practice where I didn't know 19 of them. Now, if the hospital is what within a specific practice is what's going to give you relief, then go with that and just really rely also on your birthing partner, whether it's your husband, your wife, or whatever. And I would say educate them too, because I knew and my birth team knew that I didn't want any questions asked, because if I wanted something, I was going to speak up. So knowing that Mark had learned literally everything I had learned gave me one thing less to worry about. So that's important too. Having the least amount of choices was really important too. And then another thing, it sounds so cheesy when you're like, trust your body. But I kept telling myself that our ancestors have been doing this for so long. And like, there's no way for this baby to stay inside of me forever. So I was like, it's going to come out no matter what. That actually gave me a lot of, because I'm such a controlling type of person when it comes to like work and my life and everything. I like to be in control. So knowing that I had no control of that was really important to, like, not having control of when the baby was going to come, and the baby was going to come when it was going to come. I had to like let go of those expectations, but I was still in control because I could move around. I could do all these things. Right. Yeah. And yeah, just keep educating yourself. That's like my big one. Take a birth class, listen to things, like find a community. That's so important, whether it's for birthing, fitness, everyday life. Like, it takes a village. That is the biggest. You're not supposed to do life by yourself. And so that's such a big thing.
And so tell me, I just want to end on that, because one of the things that we have talked about a lot, just like, you know, one-to-one offline, is just how strong of a community you were able to build with other women. And I think there's a lot of us, especially since COVID, where we just do everything by ourselves, right? It's just self-paced everything. Go do your own research. I'm doing this on my own. I'm researching on my own. And there's almost this lack of togetherness or, you know, community in this birthing world, because motherhood and birth can be very polarizing. Unfortunately, it's like, if you don't fall in this one category of like unmedicated and natural versus medicated versus hospital versus out of hospital, like it can be very difficult to navigate, right? Especially as a first-time mom. So can you just touch on like what community did for you in this journey, like how that made a difference in how you prepared or how you even transitioned into motherhood?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell Shelly that I've mentioned her twice already, but Shelly, who was taking the class with me, as well as other women, she and I connected first. And I was like, I hope I'm not being creepy by adding you on Instagram, but we're in Chanel's class. And then more people started joining this like chat group. And when we had questions regarding like labor or pregnancy, or wanted to double check about something in the class, we had that group thread going. So if you're taking a class with Chanel or with other people, I strongly suggest connecting with them, because what this has turned into has been, of course, I have friends that have babies and they've been amazing, and they've been able to support me and guide me when it comes to like sleep regression and, you know, all these other things. But the women that I met in the class have babies that are like a month apart. So every time one of them would give birth, they would share their experience and how they pushed through or what obstacles they faced. And so that the next person that was in line, the next woman that was in line, we were able to have that insight for ourselves. So in a way, I already felt supported by this community that I had access to and now continue to have access to. Now we're all talking about, you know, like what milestones our kids are skipping or not reaching, or, you know, we were talking about what formulas we have used, or breastfeeding difficulties that we've had. And so this has carried through thanks to the class. And it feels really comforting to know that everyone's doing their own thing, but we're all in it together as well. And that there is no shame, and there should not be any shame at all in asking questions and in sharing struggles, but also sharing wins. And that's one thing that we talked about in the chat a few weeks ago, that just because your kid like crawled 2 months before mine, because mine took a while, like there shouldn't be no shame in that either. Like this is not a competition, because we are all doing motherhood as best as we can, and we're all here to cheer each other on as well. And that was the same with the birth stories as well. You know, there were a lot of hospitals, unmedicated, medicated, and we were all just so excited for one another.
Yeah. Yeah. Y'all's, and for those of you who want to hear Shelly's story, I interviewed Shelly and her husband on my Instagram. And so if you go back a little bit, their story is on there to listen to as well. But it's really, really important to have that space because, you know, and I can just end this here, like the way that you prepare for birth is really important when it comes to the village. The people who pour into you need to be and around you and are surrounded around you should be people who are empowering you and uplifting you, not people who are going to doubt everything that you do because it's different from what they did or different from what they believe in. And there's a space and a place for them, but there's also a space and a place for the people who are going to be able to cheer you on and hold your hand along the journey in this process. And so it's been really beautiful to see y'all's friendships blossom. I see you liking each other's stuff on Instagram all the time, and just like referring to each other and how much this journey like has meant. Like I heard about some of the moms who gave birth in the program through you guys before they told me. They're like, oh yeah, so-and-so just had her baby. And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, she just sent us some pictures in the group. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So now I know, you know, I'm able to like reach out to them and see how things are going and things of that nature. But anyways, I say all that to say, I'm just so proud of you, and I'm just so grateful to know you. I'm so grateful that you were open to sharing your story with the world. And for those of you who want to learn more, just from her own experience, music therapy, that is her area of expertise, like learning how music, because there's so much that I learned from you about music therapy, and how much that plays a role in this process as well. So thank you. Make sure you guys follow her on Instagram. This is going to be saved so you guys can rewatch this at any point, just to help motivate you and inspire you for your upcoming birth. If you do want to join our community, I did put the link in the comments. I'll also put it in the description so that you guys can apply to join our community, because it's extremely important. It's extremely rich. And there's so many women who are probably located near you that it doesn't just have to be virtual friendships. It can be in-person friendships, and you guys can share resources of different providers and different resources that you guys can use in your own area. So would love to meet you. We will hop on a Zoom call and just kind of chat and see if this is a good fit and this community is a good fit for you. And again, MG, thank you for sharing your story.
Of course. Thank you so much. And just so you know, Lori, who is also in the class, is in DC, and we still have to have a play date and meet. But yes, join Chanel's class and like, let's all be friends, because it's such a beautiful thing. But thank you so much for letting me share my story.
Yes. And thank you for like making this happen, because I know your baby is like asleep right now. And Mark is like, let me have my wife back during our me time. So tell Mark I said hi. And thank you guys. And we will see you guys soon. Good night.
Thanks.